In this lecture, we're going to complete our coverage of the male reproductive system, and we start with the primary reproductive organ, the testis, or plural testes. And once again, these are the external genitalia of the male, and it's important to know that the testes serve both as an exocrine gland and an endocrine gland. And so, as an exocrine gland, the secretions of the testes function to deliver those secretions, which include sperm cells, through the urethra. So there's only one destination through a duct, and that's the key characteristic, general characteristic of the exocrine gland. The endocrine gland is the portion or is the function of the testes which will produce testosterone and will secrete testosterone into the cardiovascular system. And in doing so, testosterone, which will function as a hormone, will travel to many destinations through the body and affect distant tissues. But in terms of the reproductive function of the testes, we begin here with the internal structures of this primary organ. And when we take a look at it, we see that a single testis is divided up into what are called lobules. So the inner portion are compartmentalized and separated by the tunica albuginea, which is this connective tissue that creates these compartments. And it's estimated there are approximately 250 to 300 lobules contained within one testis. Now, as we can see, this convoluted coiled tube is what's called the seminiferous tubule. And the seminiferous tubule is made up of cells that is the site of not just testosterone production and secretion, but this is the site where sperm cells are produced. And being a tubule, once those sperm cells are produced, those sperm cells will move through these tubules and will collect into the tubulus rectus, which will merge with other tubules coming from other lobules into the rete testis. And this portion, as you can see here, will collect the sperm and will flow in that fluid secreted by a set of cells in this region called nurse cells. And that provides other molecules necessary to sustain the life of those sperm cells. And the sperm cells will move through what are called efferent ductules, and those efferent ductules will collect inside this external feature surrounding the testis called the epididymis. And the epididymis is an important location because the sperm cells produced in these regions are not yet mature. And so the epididymis are made up of cells that will further contribute to maturation and growth of these sperm cells. And so once those sperm cells undergo maturation, those sperm cells will then travel through the ductus deferens, also referred to as the vas deferens. These are two terms that are used interchangeably, and this is the site of birth control in males, known as a vasectomy, where surgically the ductus deferens or vas deferens is severed and ligated. And what that does is that prevents the passage of sperm cells, which are the reproductive cells, through the ductus deferens. In terms of the ducts, some additional details here. Once again, the efferent ductules are those tubes, if you will, that lead out of the testis. And this is an important area once again because this is where sperm cells will mature as they move into and collect in the epididymis. And one area of the sperm cell that matures is the very tip of the head of the sperm cell called the acrosome. And this process takes at least 1 to 2 days and usually takes 12 to 16 days for sperm cells to travel through the epididymis. And the motion of the sperm cells and the fluid through these ductules, or these small tubes, occurs through what's called stereocilia, these hair-like projections, which tends to increase the surface area. And that helps to not just move the sperm cells through these ductules, but it helps to absorb fluid from the lumen of that duct. The ductus deferens or vas deferens, I put this here to show that these terms are used interchangeably, passes from the epididymis into the abdominal cavity, and this is the passageway for sperm cells. And the distal end of the ductus deferens expands, and that's called the ampulla, and we'll see that here on the next slide with the diagram. And this is where the vas deferens, or the ductus deferens, begins to merge with the accessory reproductive organs, and it merges. The first accessory organ is the seminal vesicle. And so it's important to know that the wall of the ductus deferens is made up of smooth muscle, and made up of smooth muscle, this muscle contracts, and that helps to move sperm cells and helps to move semen, which is the fluid that contains sperm cells, in a forward manner. The ejaculatory duct is approximately 2 centimeters long, and it joins the ductus deferens and the seminal vesicle. So up until the point that sperm cells reaches the seminal vesicle, it's essentially fluid secreted by the cells that also produce those sperm cells, but then there are additional fluid and secretions that are added to it by the seminal vesicles, as well as the other accessory organs. And it ends at the urethra within the prostate gland, and the prostate gland further adds more secretions to the sperm cells. So in this picture here, there are a lot of labels, but we're just going to focus on a few of the key labels that are important to the passage of sperm cells through the reproductive tract. And so we begin here with the urinary system. We have the ureter, which transports urine produced by the kidney into the temporary storage location called the urinary bladder. And note that the ureter the urethra is formed at the distal end of the urinary bladder. We have the spermatic cord as illustrated in an earlier video, and the spermatic cord once again is covered by layers of tissue, which include fascia and the cremaster muscle. So exiting the spermatic cord is the vas or ductus deferens, which transports fluid and sperm cells, and as you can see, it expands into an ampulla of that ductus deferens, and that tissue merges with the tissue of the seminal vesicle. And you can see that at the terminal end of the ductus deferens, where it merges with the seminal vesicle will start to add secretions to the sperm cells and fluid, and that merges with the urethra, and that urethra will pass through the prostate gland, and it changes names. It becomes now known as the prostatic urethra, and then it becomes called it becomes the membranous urethra. So it's still the continuous tube that functions to transport either urine or semen. It's not mature semen yet until it passes through the prostate gland and the bulbourethral gland. And so the seminal vesicle, the prostate gland, and the bulbourethral gland all add secretions to sperm cells, and at this point it is now known as fully developed semen that contains sperm cells. If we take a look at the penis, we have at this cross section a number of important structures. The most inner portion that makes up the urethra here is what's called the spongy urethra, and that's made up of essentially tissue referred to as the corpus spongiosum, and we'll talk about some of those details shortly. External to that, the thicker layer is called the corpora cavernosa, named accordingly to these series of caverns, as you can see here. And so, once again, the function of the urethra here in the male is to deliver urine or semen. And some of the key structures here, as indicated on the diagram, include the cavernosa, the corpora cavernosa, which is made up of spongy tissue channels, these caverns. And this structure here, these caverns, can fill with blood, and this is where it connects with the cardiovascular system. And so males that are experiencing what's called erectile dysfunction can take medications such as Viagra or Cialis, which affect the cardiovascular system. So these two brand names of these two drugs function to vasodilate blood vessels, and in doing so, that would increase blood flow into these caverns, that would increase that fluid through this outer layer of the external organ. In order to maintain the opening of the urethra, the corpus spongiosum, as you can see here illustrated with these perforations, helps to maintain that opening because it is pliable tissue. So the term is named because it resembles somewhat of a sponge where it can expand and maintain that expansion when necessary. At the far distal end is the crura and bulb. At the far distal end is the enlarged area called the glans penis, which is enlargement of the corpus spongiosum, as you can see here at the bottom of this picture. The prepuce, or a foreskin, covers over the external layer, and circumcision is a procedure that would remove that foreskin. And the outer opening is just simply referred to as the external urethral orifice. So some additional details on the accessory organs include the first organ, called the seminal vesicle, and the seminal vesicle produces about 60% of the semen in the male species here. And so the seminal vesicle will secrete a molecule called fibrinogen, which is a weak coagulant. So it will tend to provide some thickening of the semen, and the secretions are a high pH, which means it's more alkaline. That has the function of offsetting any acid or an acidic mucus that exists, because a low pH or very acidic environment would denature proteins of the sperm cell. The seminal vesicles will also secrete fructose, which is the fuel used by the mitochondria in the midpiece to provide energy for the tail of the sperm cell. The prostate gland is the next gland that the secretions move through, and it contributes further secretions, which is about 30% of semen. And as you can see here, it also has a high pH, which means it's alkaline, and that functions to offset any acidic secretions that are part of that semen. It also contains clotting factors, so it provides further thickening of that fluid, and fibrinolysin, or PSA, which tends to inactivate fibrin. The bulbourethral gland, the final gland that the semen will move through that urethra. It's also known as Cowper's glands, and this adds about 5% to semen and exists as a paired gland. So it secretes mucus just prior to ejaculation, and that provides what's called urethral lubrication, which are essentially is composed of glycoproteins, which helps to um, lubricate and make the flow of semen much easier. And this helps to neutralize the acidic pH or the acidic environment of the female vagina. Semen itself is the final fluid that is produced by the male reproductive system, and the urethral mucosa does produce mucus, but the accessory glands produces the produces the alkaline fluid to help to offset any acidic component of this mucus. And during emission, discharge of the semen into the prostatic urethra adds those secretions. And this is generated by the parasympathetic nervous system. And so the overall effect of parasympathetic nervous system is vasodilation. Vasodilation is a process whereby smooth muscle of the cardiovascular system is relaxed, and it allows blood vessels to increase diameter. And ejaculation is carried out by a rather fast switch from parasympathetic activation to sympathetic activation, which is the expulsion of semen from the urethra through peristalsis. And peristalsis just refers to the activation of smooth muscle to move semen through the urethra. There is a temporary coagulation, so the thickening of that semen as fibrinogen becomes fibrin, then fibrinolysin that will break up the coagulation. And so this opposite effect that you see here with fibrinolysin helps to produce an optimal level of thickening and viscosity, if you will, to that semen. With each ejaculation, approximately 2 to 5 milliliters of semen is produced, and anywhere from 75 to 400 million sperm cells per milliliter of semen is generated. So you can see a rather wide range of cells that are contained within semen. And the reason this is such a high number is that before those sperm cells reaches the uterine tubes or the fallopian tubes of the female, most of those sperm cells, the vast majority of those sperm cells, will die off. And that is initiated because the acrosome, the very tip of the sperm cell, starts to degrade. So this ends our lecture here on the male reproductive system.